I think we spent a good enough time talking about how observables work and how we should use them and why we should use them. Let's move forward and get to some code. We're going to go straight into using our HTTP module and using our first call. And we're going to do that directly inside of app component. So open up app component. Let's delete the styles. We don't need that anymore. And up at the top, we're going to import the Angular HTTP, and we're going to import HTTP from there. Now that we have that, we can add it to our constructor so we can actually use it. Private HTTP, and that's going to be the HTTP library that we're going to use. We don't need this message anymore. Now, when this component gets activated or initialized, we're going to use that HTTP library to go and get those users from that recres.in API. So since we're doing this on init, we need to bring in the on init interface. We need to implement it. And then we will create ng on init. And then here's where we will grab users. Let's go take a look at our API again. Over in our API, we have list users, and this is at recres.in/API/users. So that will be our URL that we're going to hit with the HTTP library. Let's make a GET call right now. We're going to go this.http.get. So now this is going to return an observable, but it's a cold observable since we haven't subscribed to it yet. Let's go ahead and subscribe to it. And we get data back. Let's console log that data to see what comes out of the server. What we should get is, if we look over here, this is the response. What we should get is all of this information here. Let's give that a shot. We'll go over to our Angular app, and in the console, now when this application gets initialized, we have the response. Now this doesn't exactly look like the response that's coming out of the API. There's a really good reason for that, and that's because the Angular2 library follows the fetch standard for API calls. And it's a standardized way to pass data around between different sites. We'll throw a link of that into the notes. But basically what you need to know is that the information for this response is going to be in the body of this response. So we have to go ahead and grab that. We're going to go data.json. So this is going to be a response from the fetch standard, and the response always has a JSON method on it to get all of the data out of that call. We don't have to worry about the implementation of the fetch standard. The cool thing about fetch is that it gives us a standardized way to get information about headers and different parts of the server that we're hitting. But right now we only want the data, so we're going to say data.json. And here we see how Visual Studio Code is giving us these hints. We can hover over data and see that it is a response, and we can hover over this JSON to see what it actually does for us. Let's see the console log now. We have an object, which is the exact same data that's coming out of the API that we wanted. So we have data, and these are going to be our users. Perfect. We have just made our first HTTP call with Angular2 and HTTP. We've also subscribed to our very first observable. It really was not that different from using .then like you would with a promise. Let's go ahead and assign these users to our application and then just loop through them really quickly. We are going to import from shared models user, and we're going to pull the user, and that is user singular. And we're going to have users, which is an array of our user class. Now when this comes through, we're going to say this.users is equal to data.json.data, and that is going to be the users that comes out of our data.json. And now that we have these, we can loop over them with our structural directives. We'll say div, and we'll go ng if users. And let's loop over those. We're going to say div ng4 let user of users. And let's just give out their first name, so we'll say h2 user.name. Oh, first name. All right, that should be enough to go ahead, grab the information from our API, take those users, apply it to our array, and then display that array inside of our app component template. Let's take a look. Now we have the 3 users, and that was a really easy way to go ahead and use the HTTP library to go and grab data as an observable, and then act upon it by subscribing to that data stream. So really, this is going to be the main way that we're going to use the HTTP library, whether it be a .get, a .post, and whatever it is, this is how we're going to use Angular2 and HTTP together. One thing I'd like to point out is while this is our first part of the demo, we injected private HTTP directly into a component. In the future, you want to refrain from doing that. You always want to use HTTP and abstract it into a service. That's where you want to use HTTP. You don't really want to inject it in the component. The component itself should not be concerned with how it gets data. It just needs to know that it uses a service to get data. And the service is going to be what's responsible for implementing the data getting and data creation or whatever we need to do with our API. Now that we've gotten a little taste of how the Angular2 HTTP works, let's go ahead and move forward. We'll talk a little bit about how the operators work, and then we'll start building out our application and how you would see Angular2 HTTP in a more production level environment.